Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, the right station for talk, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of central Indiana. So welcome back to the studio, Justin.
Thank you so much for having me, John. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
So, folks, this week, the Republicans are pulling off the biggest lie in American politics. They're working hand in glove with Democrats for a government funding bill that funds Biden spending levels for all levels of government. Speaker Johnson, Leader Thune, Jim Banks, Todd Young, Aaron Houchin are all working to give Biden spending levels for the federal government. And they are putting on a show with Democrats over the threatened government shutdown over funding for health care for illegal Democrats. Folks, it's all a show. Number one, I thought Jim Banks was going to rid Indiana of all illegal immigrants. Number two, the spending increases our nation's debt by another $2 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars. So Jim Banks, Todd Young, Aaron Houchin, Jefferson Shreve all just voted for trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new government debt. While behind the scenes, they are all in bed with the Democrats, pushing through line for line in this bill, Biden spending priorities and Biden spending levels. Folks, it's all just a dog and pony show, throwing smoke bombs to make you think they are actually doing something on one issue, which of course everyone agrees with. We should not be giving funding for illegals to have free health care in the United States. Of course not. But folks, guess what? It's all for show. When all they are doing is still funding Democrat spending. Every member of the Indiana GOP delegation. You want to know why we keep getting more and more inflation? It is because career politician Republicans spend dollar for dollar exactly the same as the Democrats. Republicans have had the House, Senate, and presidency for over 9 months now. And Jim Banks and Todd Young and our Indiana GOP delegation just wants to go on vacation. They took off the entire month of August. I believe they're only scheduled to work all year 135 days out of 365. Well, that's nice work if you can get it.
I think we should put work in quotation marks because let's face it, they don't actually work when they go into the Capitol.
Well, when they do go in, they just vote for trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new debts. Folks, I say that 6 times because it is $6 trillion of new debt that Jim Banks and Todd Young voted for this year.
I mean, it's just
the sky's the limit with them.
Exactly. It's what it is. It's just the Uni-Party back to its old antics. I mean, the Republicans, they want to say that they're against the Democrats on this and that, but let's face it, they just work with them lockstep.
It's the same as
all the time.
Right. It's the same as what's happening here in Indiana. You know, there is no way in hell I would have ever let that amount of spending go through the United States Senate. That's why I ran for the Senate, to stand up for Hoosiers, to stand up for taxpayers. You know, I want to be like Rand Paul and Thomas Massie, actually doing something and voting against these massive debt increases.
And, you know, John, that's exactly why they didn't want you to get in, because they knew that you wouldn't just sit by and let them spend and spend and spend and spend.
Because they're doing quite well being potted plants for the Democrat Party.
Exactly.
Isn't that sad?
Absolutely.
You know,
it's shameful for a state like Indiana, a
red state.
As you say, a ruby red state like Indiana to have
and we have the entire Indiana GOP delegation in the House and the Senate voting for trillions times 6 dollars of new debt.
It's shameful. Absolutely shameful. It's no excuse for it.
Well, I have a new name for Jim Banks. It's Jim Bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's about right.
Because that is exactly what he is doing to America. Let me explain something, folks. Banks and Young hide behind the filibuster to say we really can't do anything in Washington. Guess what? At any moment in time, yesterday, today, tomorrow, anytime, a simple majority of the Senate, just 51 votes, can remove the filibuster, which is a 60-vote threshold, for any legislation. we could have conservative spending levels today. Yes, I know we have two Republican senators who are really liberals, Snowe and Murkowski, but by and large, every other member of the U.S. Senate delegation is allegedly, they say, conservative. So we have a strong 52-seat majority. We could easily pass conservative spending levels today. We could be reducing government. We could be reducing the nation's debt. But fake conservatives, just look at Jim Banks and Todd Young, who come to Lincoln Day dinners and talk about how conservative they are and give rah-rah speeches on, the flag, while they go and vote the exact opposite for massive new spending and massive new government debt. They are just pigs at the trough, feeding and feeding. So their corporate donors like BlackRock continue to rake in federal funds. While you face the resultant massive inflation and a lower standard of living year after year after year. When Jim Banks and Todd Young were sworn into Congress, your share of the national debt as a taxpayer was $170,000. Today, it's nearly double just 8 years later after both Banks and Young were sworn in, after they both voted for trillions times $6 of new debt.
And by the way, these
your share today as a taxpayer, folks, went from $170,000 to $325,000 today. That is exactly on Jim Banks and Todd Young. They voted for it.
Exactly. And by the way, these are so-called fiscal conservatives. They call them, I guarantee, at these Lincoln Day dinners, they go around, I'm fiscally conservative. We need to stop the spending, but yet they vote for this. I mean, come on. Give me a break. Give me a break.
Well, this filibuster threat, and the reason, folks, the government shut down is because the Republicans are all saying, the filibuster, we can't do anything. It's all hogwash. It is all for show. Republicans could end the filibuster with a simple majority vote, not 60 votes, at any time. The filibuster is not in the Constitution. It is purely a rule, folks, and that rule can always be changed by majority vote. It does not take 60 votes to end the filibuster. So anytime you hear these career politicians talking about the filibuster, they're using it as a fig leaf to hide behind. Career politicians love it because they can spend like the greedy pigs they are and say, well, gosh darn it, we tried. We just don't have enough votes to really cut spending. It's all hogwash, folks. I'm sorry to use all these farmer terms, but it is pure hogwash. I say this with every bit of seriousness and gravity that I can muster. Career politicians are destroying our country. And the Indiana GOP delegation is rolling in the pig slop in Washington on and on. Here's what Senator Rand Paul had to say about all this. Congress is looking to vote to put us trillions more in debt again. This is from Senator Rand Paul. At this rate, rescinding $9 billion is like bailing out the Titanic with a teaspoon. Both parties talk big and spend bigger. Again, that's from Rand Paul. Both parties, both Republicans and Democrats, talk big and spend bigger. If we're serious about balancing the budget, we need more than just talk. We need principles. Folks, there are no principles with a career politician because a career politician only cares about their election and nothing else.
Exactly, because if they end up fixing the problem, they don't have anything to run on. People like Todd Young and Jim Banks probably wish they didn't have the majority in the Senate because then they could whine, we don't have the majority,
exactly.
We can't do anything.
That is the plan all along. The Republicans in Congress, I am sure Jim Banks did not like being in the majority in the House for the last 2.5 years because people like me are holding him accountable for his actions when there were no actions. All
Exactly.
he did was vote for leadership that just continually passed billions and trillions of dollars of new debt. He did it every time. Well, folks, sometimes the Senate Republicans say the quiet part out loud. Listen to this. This is from the Senate Republicans' Twitter page. This is a tweet from the Senate Republicans, the Senate GOP. The choice is clear. We need a clean Republican bill. It has a check mark by it. Bipartisan. No gimmicks. That says it all. Folks, the Republicans in the Senate Jim Banks and Todd Young, are pushing a bill that is a Biden spending bill. They call it bipartisan openly in a Senate Republican tweet. We have the majority. Why on earth are we passing a bipartisan spending bill in Congress? We should not be. We should be passing a conservative Republican spending bill, and we're not. You know, folks, the government shut down this past week. You know, I agree with Charlie Kirk. He said the same thing as Ralph Norman did. Congress should not be paid during a government shutdown. They are not doing their jobs. They just go on vacation. They just go and do Lord knows what. Well, you and I have to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have to farm the fields. We have to gather the eggs, fix the plumbing, teach our kids. What are they doing? They're on vacation. Again, Congress is only scheduled to work 135 days out of 365 days this year. So they can't do their job. They refuse to come up with a new spending bill that has Republican spending priorities. Instead, they are just voting on a continuance. It's a continuing resolution of Biden spending levels. Folks, we have a Republican president, President Trump. Why on earth are Jim Banks and Todd Young pushing this bill that is a Biden spending bill?
There's no reason for it whatsoever.
Well, again, it's all fake. Folks, remember when everyone knew pro wrestling was fake and they finally admitted it, but people still watched it anyhow? That's what we're at today. It's Groundhog Day. You know, how many government shutdowns have we went through? And it has never resulted in any meaningful change. It has never resulted for Republicans in any conservative spending. Only Democrat spending. Folks, it's all a show. Folks, we're out of time for this segment. When we come back, we're going to get into the Indiana Economic Development Corporation and one of the biggest scandals you have probably never heard about. The media is covering up. Folks, when we come back, we're going to get right into the IEDC. You will not believe your ears. This is John Rust on the Radio. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Freedom 95, the right station for talk on 950 AM and 95.9 FM. Here in the studio today with Justin. Welcome back, Justin.
Thank you so much.
So before the break, folks, we were talking about the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. You know, Rob Kendall says this. It's the biggest scam in state history. Absolutely. Rob calls it a giant money laundering operation. If it were done by anyone but the government, a whole bunch of people would be at serious risk of going to prison. Absolutely true. You know, folks, stepping back, this all relates, you know, all these shows that I'm doing relate because it all relates to how energy prices are going up in Indiana specifically, how property taxes are going up specifically, how gasoline taxes are going up specifically. Remember, we're the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. And guess why? Is it because we need the money for roads? We have the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. That, in addition, now the Republican supermajority wants to impose tolls on every square mile of Indiana interstates. What are they doing with all this money? Folks, it all relates. If you remember back in the 90s, the energy company Enron was the next best thing, and all the Texas politicians were talking about this energy utility in the state of Texas being a wonderful new thing that would give lower electric rates for Texans. It turned out to be absolutely false. The same is happening today with these data centers, and what they're saying is AI. So folks, listen to this. Oracle's stock jumped by 25% after being promised $60 billion, with a B, billion dollars a year from OpenAI. An amount of money OpenAI doesn't earn yet, to provide cloud computing facilities that Oracle hasn't built, and which will require the equivalent of 4.5 gigawatts of power, the equivalent of 2.25 Hoover dams. And how does this relate to the IEDC? Well, folks, the Indianapolis Star had a fascinating and incredible article on this. It was called The Three Kings. It's an investigation put forth by the Indy Star. Top IEDC officials and his partners received $180 million in IEDC contracts. It's literally the exact opposite of what all this money was ever supposed to be for. This is an article by Haley Colombo, Marissa Meador, and Kayla Dwyer of the Indianapolis Star. It was published on September 24th. The Three Kings, top IEDC official and his partner, received $180 million in IEDC contracts. This is from the article direct. For years in Indiana, a few powerful insiders wielded a firm grasp on how the Indiana Economic Development Corporation spent the largesse of millions of taxpayer dollars allocated to them each year. These are the key points from the article. The IEDC under Governor Eric Holcomb doled out more than $180 million in awards to entities connected to at least one of those three men. Governor Mike Braun is about to release the results of an audit into the Indiana Economic Development Corporation and said potential conflicts of interest are part of what's being examined. Experts describe the distribution of contracts to the same three men as abnormal and quote-unquote ethically dubious. So Jamie Knoll, he's in prison for $3 million in direct theft. The IEDC, instead of stealing the money. So folks, this is directly from the article. Dave Roberts was a top leader at the IEDC who oversaw former Governor Eric Holcomb's signature $1 billion plan to invest in entrepreneurship in the state. Paul Mitchell was in the private sector after serving as former Governor Mitch Daniels' economic policy guru. And Chad Pittman, another Daniels-era staffer, worked for the Purdue Research Foundation, which invests in Purdue-connected entrepreneurship. Together, the three men are known by a few names in the Indiana startup world. One founder knew them as the Three Kings. Another entrepreneur called them the Three Musketeers. Again, this is directly from the article. No matter the name, the influence they held had the power to make or break some startups' chances to access state economic development contracts and grants. Multiple sources told the Indianapolis Star. In fact, three companies said they believed they were squeezed out of the state when their activities were interpreted as being at odds with or in competition with those men.
I mean, John, as you said before, the IEDC, all they do is they pick the winners and the losers.
Well, that's exactly what it's doing. So this is continuing in this article. Meanwhile, entities controlled by the Three Kings benefited handsomely from taxpayer-funded grants and no-bid professional service contracts. The IEDC under Holcomb doled out more than $180 million over less than 6 years in awards to entities controlled either in whole or in part by at least one and sometimes all of the three men. Oftentimes, Roberts himself was involved in the IEDC's decision to dedicate millions of dollars worth of taxpayer dollars to organizations he and the other two men oversaw in some capacity. This is from the article again. You're saying that this is a quote, you're saying that you're using taxpayer dollars to help startups and bring stuff to our economy, but when you actually look at the record, you're doing the exact opposite, unquote, said one startup founder who asked for anonymity for fear of retaliation. Why hasn't the IEDC held them accountable? The concerns about the Three Kings highlight an uncomfortable truth about economic development agencies. Those with the power to gatekeep large sums of taxpayer money are often from the business community themselves, which means efforts to help the state's businesses at large occasionally end up benefiting a tight-knit group of insiders.
You know, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. It doesn't matter where the corruption starts in Indiana, but it seems like the road always seems to lead back to the IEDC.
And this is where the money went. This is from that article, where the money went. While the IEDC is traditionally known for its work in luring and retaining businesses and jobs in Indiana in exchange for economic incentives and tax credits, the agency's lesser-known Innovation and Entrepreneurship Department has deployed millions of dollars of tax dollars to public-private partnerships designed to support the growth of cutting-edge industries. It's in this space that the entities controlled by at least one of the three kings, including the Battery Innovation Center, the Indiana Autonomous Challenge, 912 Next Level Manufacturing Institute, the Sport Tech HQ, among others, heavily benefited from IEDC funding. An IndyStar analysis found that more than $100 million worth of awards were doled out to those organizations, while Roberts, who held the top leadership role at IEDC, played an instrumental role in choosing funding recipients of Holcomb's Innovation Initiative, expected to reach $1 billion, with a B, billion dollars. But the awards to the entities kept coming after Roberts left the IEDC as well. Entities connected with the men have received a quarter of nearly $450 million given from the state's 21st Century Research and Technology Fund throughout its 26-year history, according to an IndyStar analysis of grants in the IEDC's transparency portal. The funds make direct investments in tech startups and public-private partnerships. So folks, we're out of time in this segment. When we come back, we're going to keep diving into this incredible article by the Indianapolis Star on what's going on at the IEDC. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM, the right station for talk. So, folks, before the break, we were talking about the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and we're diving into how this funding went from people who were running the IEDC to these groups that they're connected to. This is continuing from the Indianapolis Star article. Perhaps the most obvious example of Roberts' overlapping roles was laid out in a 2022 request for more IEDC funding from the Battery Innovation Center, where federal nonprofit filings show Roberts was serving as board chair. The letter from Roberts' organization was addressed to Roberts in his capacity as IEDC's Chief Innovation Officer. Federal nonprofit records show that Roberts wasn't paid by the Battery Innovation Center in 2022, but he earned more than $45,000 between 2023 and 2024, which he said was because he served a recent brief stint as CEO. Pittman is currently the board's chairman, and Mitchell earns more than $500,000 from his role at ESN last year, according to the nonprofit filings. $500,000 nonprofit. Folks, that's where your IEDC money is going. The IEDC board members who were responsible for approving grants to the entities during Roberts' tenure did not reply to the IndyStar's request for comment. This is continuing from the article. Even after Roberts left state government in 2022, the Three Kings entities have continued to enjoy the benefits of IEDC grants and contracts. Several of the contracts were still active, including millions of dollars worth of grants to the Applied Research Institute and 912. Others have only recently ended. Shortly before Roberts left the IEDC to become CEO of the Applied Research Institute, that entity received a grant from the IEDC that would eventually grow to be worth more than $17.5 million, part of a nearly $34 million grant from the IEDC that group has received since late 2022. This is from the article. Abe Schwab, a professor who has specialized in applied ethics and conflicts of interest at Purdue University, Fort Wayne, said Roberts' situation doesn't even pass the sniff test. Schwab said the awards overall raise questions about whether taxpayer money went out the door because of personal relationships rather than a process by which one would evaluate the best bang for the buck for the citizens of Indiana. This is from the article. Who benefited from the IEDC money? Some of the millions of dollars went to clear ends, like the launch of Mitchell's Indy Autonomous Challenge, a racing league that brought together universities to develop autonomous high-speed vehicles that have raced everywhere from the Indianapolis Speedway to the Andromo Nazionale Monza in Italy. You know, folks, my comment on this is, why on earth are your hard-working tax dollars being used to pay for auto races in Italy?
Exactly. There's no reason for that. Like,
why on earth are we racing in Italy with taxpayer money?
Makes 0 sense.
You know, this is from the article. Every professional services contract IndyStar found for entities controlled by one of the 3 men awarded during Roberts' tenure was signed without a bidding process. Greg Leroy of government watchdog group Good Jobs first expressed concern about the IEDC's reliance on no-bid contracts, calling it ethically dubious because of the lack of competition inherent in using some of the same contractors time after time. One of Pittman's entities, 912, was awarded more than $13 million while Roberts worked at the IEDC, including in this no-bid professional service contracts. This is from the article. To Marianne Feldman, an Arizona State University professor who researches economic development, the story of the Three Kings taps into a larger question about whether economic development agencies have fulfilled their promises. We have the situation here where this quasi-government entity is picking winners, she said. Maybe it's time these functions be brought back under the auspices of government, where there should be more accountability by design. No, I say stop it. You end the IEDC today. You defund it today. You stop it. Refund the money to the taxpayers. It has been a boondoggle, unfortunately, picking winners and losers in the Indiana economy. Well, listen to this. One startup stayed away from Indiana. We wanted to do business in Indiana, but because of the way the IEDC, were acting, we don't. The startup founder, who requested anonymity for fear of retribution, told the Indy Star. Folks, that's costing us jobs. Not only just are we funding pet projects by our board members' connections, we are discouraging real investment in Indiana by doing so.
Like defunding the economy.
No, exactly. And this is exactly a quote from the article, quote unquote. Quote, so they did exactly contrary of what they were supposed to do, help startups, she said, unquote. Well, of course, right there, folks. That says it all. And it left that startup with a sour taste. And now she plans to avoid doing business in Indiana. That's just sad. And this is what she said. If I was someone fresh out of school or someone younger than that did not have a network outside of Indiana, I would have been dead, she said. That's what happens when you have government picking winners and losers. Again, this is from the article. It's literally the exact opposite of what all this money was ever supposed to be for. And that's from a former IAC supplier who told that to the Indianapolis Star. Again, this is an article from Haley Colombo and Kayla Dwyer and Marissa Meador at the Indianapolis Star.
I just want to say that they are absolutely awesome for bringing this story to light, because this should be the absolutely biggest news story in Indiana, or at least one of the biggest news stories.
Well, it is in the Star, but we have to get other.
The Indy Star can only do so much. We need everybody talking about this.
Well, Indy Reporter, this is Indy_Reporter_ on Twitter. They say this is where things get interesting. The IEDC is a massive money laundering outfit that helps Mitch Daniels and friends. They specifically mention Chad Pittman, David Roberts, and Paul Mitchell. And how this relates to specifically what we've been talking about in Indiana, why things are getting more expensive, is because our tax dollars are not going to help Indiana businesses unless you're connected. No, they're going to fund these data centers. You know, this is from the Wall Street Journal. And it's talking about a windswept town of Ellendale, North Dakota, population of 1,100. It has 2 hotels, a Dollar General, a Pentecostal Bible College, and a half-built AI factory bigger than 10 Home Depots. Its more than $15 billion price tag is equivalent to a quarter of the state's annual economic output. The artificial intelligence boom has ushered in one of the costliest building sprees in world history. Over the past 3 years, leading tech firms have committed more towards AI data centers like the one in Ellendale, plus chips and energy, than it cost to build the interstate highway system over 4 decades. Silicon Valley watchers worry that the enthusiasm for AI has turned into a bubble and has increasingly loud echoes of the mania surrounding the internet's infrastructure build-out in the 1990s. And I'll add what was happening with Enron. This is from Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. Our citizens should not be subsidizing via higher prices for electricity the exorbitant power and water usage of AI data centers. And this is from his wife. This is going to be a big flashpoint. And I'm standing with the hardworking people of this state. Ron DeSantis is exactly right about the impact of these massive AI data centers. He's 100% spot on. From Daniel Horowitz. Literally, Ron DeSantis is the only Republican willing to stand up to the special interests in big tech. While Jim Banks is clinking champagne glasses with Mark Zuckerberg in Virginia, Hoosiers are having to pay more and more and more in electricity. Folks, Indiana electricity rates went up 9% last year. They are up on average 17% this year over the 9% last year. We, the Indiana electric ratepayers, are the ones paying for these massive data centers to these trillion-dollar oligarchs. So who funds Jim Banks?
Probably BlackRock.
Exactly. Folks, guess who BlackRock is now buying? This is from WRTV Indianapolis, right here in our state. Regulators weigh billion-dollar utility takeovers as bill rises for consumers. Private equity giants like BlackRock are buying local utilities to power AI-driven data centers, sparking ratepayer and regulatory concerns. Well, of course.
And BlackRock isn't just a Jim Banks issue. I mean, they own about most of the politicians in our country.
Well, this is from that WRTV article. Private investment firms that are helping finance America's artificial intelligence race and the huge build-out of energy. Hungry data centers are getting interested in the local utilities that deliver to regular customers and serves to power AI. No, who's paying for that? It's you, the taxpayer.
Exactly.
It just bears repeating over and over. That's why our rates are going through the roof, 17% this year, 9% last year. Opponents of the acquisition suspect that BlackRock is only interested in squeezing bigger profits from regular ratepayers. Well, of course. What did we just say? Look how much they're going up. Of course, the corporation funding Jim Banks wants to make more and more money off of Indiana taxpayers. That says it all. This is from John Stossel. The post office said you can't get it there overnight. That when FedEx did, suddenly others could, and even the United States Post Office had to improve its service. That's the power of competition. Government should not be picking winners and losers. If you leave a government entity to control something, you're not going to get good service. It's always best to let private enterprise lead. You can't have government picking winners and losers, and that's what's happening in the state of Indiana. So folks, we're out of time in this segment, but when we come back, we're going to talk about what all this money that has went from the Indiana toll roads that we have now up in northern Indiana, where that money has gone to. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, the right station for talk all across our beautiful fruited plain of central Indiana. So, folks, before the break, we were talking about what all this money from all these toll roads that Braun and the Indiana GOP establishment is proposing. What's that money going for? Well, this is from Indy Reporter. Again, Indy_Reporter_ on Twitter. New running theory, what the toll roads Braun wants to bring in is actually going to be used for venture capitalists. The state used money from the 2006 toll roads and put it in the Next Generation Trust Fund. Folks, remember what we were just talking about, where that money went. The Next Level Indiana Fund is an investment fund created in 2017 by the Indiana General Assembly with a Republican majority. It was built from money originally tied to the 2006 lease of the Indiana Toll Road, which generated a large lump sum for the state. That money was first placed in the Next Generation Trust Fund and later transitioned into the Next Level Indiana Fund. And the purpose, listen to this, to attract outside capital by partnering with private investors and venture capital firms. That first investment size was $250 million. Guess what? It quickly went up to $500 million to be set aside as a long-term investment account to generate earnings for future projects. Folks, that's not what government should be doing. Government should be fixing your roads, filling the potholes, making sure our kids are educated correctly. Instead, we have a bunch of people running around wanting to pick what our next economic drivers will be in Indiana. Let the free market choose that. You can't have the state choosing where we're all going to be working someday, because if they choose, we're going to be working for companies, it'll be like Enron, that will not be here in 10 years.
Exactly. To piggyback off what you said a little bit, it's like the government's job is to serve us, but instead they just serve themselves.
They want to be our lords. We already have one lord. I think we don't need any more.
Exactly.
So, folks, this past week, there's a little bit of controversy on this, but I thought it was awesome. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth addressed all the American generals and flag officers at Quantico, Virginia on September 30th, 2025. He gave an excellent speech. There's been some pushback from the left on it, but I just want to read you some of this because I thought it was excellent. This is from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. Good morning and welcome to the War Department, because the era of the Department of Defense is over. The only mission of the newly restored Department of War is this: war fighting, and in preparing to win, unrelenting and uncompromising in that pursuit, not because we want war. No one wants war. It's because we love peace. We love peace for our fellow citizens. They deserve peace, and they rightfully expect us to deliver.
Exactly. That's why the saying is so popular, peace through strength.
This is from the Secretary. If I've learned one core lesson in my 8 months in this job, it's that personnel is policy. The best way to take care of troops is to give them good leaders committed to the warfighting culture of the department. Not perfect leaders, good leaders, competent, qualified, professional, agile and aggressive, innovative, risk-taking, apolitical, faithful to their oath and to the Constitution. This is from Secretary Hegseth again. For too long, we have simply not done that. The military has been forced by foolish and reckless politicians to focus on the wrong things. In many ways, this speech is about fixing decades of decay. For too long, we promoted too many uniformed leaders for the wrong reasons, based on their race, based on gender quotas, based on historic so-called first. We pretended that combat arms and non-combat arms are the same thing. Foolish and reckless political leaders set the wrong compass heading, and we lost our way. We became the woke department. This administration has done a great deal from day one to remove the social justice, politically correct, and toxic ideological garbage that has infected our department. To rip out the politics, no more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses, no more climate change worship, no more division, distraction, or gender delusions, no more debris. This is also from the Secretary of War again. This also means grooming standards, no more beards, long hair, superficial individual expression. We're going to cut our hair, shave our beards, and adhere to standards.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a fighting force that's uniform. The era of unprofessional appearance is over. Boy, I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
No more beardos. Have you ever heard that expression before?
Oh, yeah.
The era of rampant and ridiculous shaving profiles is done. Simply put, if you do not meet the male-level physical standards for combat positions, cannot pass a physical training test, or don't want to shave and look professional, it's time for a new position or a new profession. Toxic leadership is endangering subordinates with low standards. Toxic leadership is promoting people based on quotas instead of based on merit. The number one key on his entire speech was merit only. And that 100% applies to life in combat. That is life. He's talking about combat. That is life or death. Absolutely. You cannot afford to have people that you're fighting with that aren't held to the same physical standards that you are, or that what your opponent is doing.
Exactly.
And this is from the Secretary of War again. Of course, being a racist has been illegal in our formation since 1948. The same goes for sexual harassment. Both are wrong and illegal. But telling someone to shave or get a haircut or get in shape or to fix their uniform or show up on time to work hard, that's exactly the kind of discrimination we want. Key words there, folks: to work hard and to show up to work. If only our United States Congress would follow that advice.
Exactly, because that's not asking a whole lot. I mean, come on.
They would absolutely fail in the new Department of War.
Absolutely.
Again, our Congress, folks, while we're in a government shutdown, our Congress is only working 135 days a year out of 365. That says everything.
And again, I put work in quotation marks because let's face it, are they actually working? Is it actually work?
Well, we got to get back to merit. This is from the Secretary again. At the War Department, promotions across the joint force will be based on one thing: merit. Colorblind, gender neutral, and merit-based. The entire promotion process, including evaluations of warfighting capabilities, is being thoroughly re-examined. We've already done a lot in this area, but more changes are coming soon. This is exactly, folks, what we need in Washington, D.C. and Congress. It's the same thing.
And it's a shame, especially talking about the military, that we even have to talk about this. I mean, to me, it should be obvious that it should be the most qualified person to do the job, no matter the race, no matter the gender, no matter none of that. It should obviously be the person who is best fit for that job. And as you said, the same exact things should apply to our Congress, but unfortunately they don't.
Pete's talking about where we want people to show up for work. I would ask, where in the hell has the Republican House majority been in the last 2.5 years? The House of Representatives controls the absolute purse strings for all of government. Our Republicans that control Congress has been funding this bullcrap that the Secretary of War has been talking about for the last 2.5 years. Every penny has been funded by a Republican majority Congress. Folks, have you ever heard the expression asleep at the switch? A little background on that commonly heard expression. It's a railroad term for a switchman at a literal switch, controlling the movement of trains to go one way or another. Asleep at the switch means the switch tender, the person whose job it is to move that physical switch, to move a train from one direction to another, is literally asleep. Our nation is a massive, awesome freight train moving forward. Our Republican majority Congress has been asleep at the switch now for over 2.5 years. Even this past week, the Republican Senate and the Republican House, except for Thomas Massie, voted to fully fund Joe Biden. The previous president's spending levels exactly the same. We have a zombie Republican Congress that refuses to do its job and cut spending, cut government, and reduce our nation's debt, rather than adding trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt like Jim Banks, a.k.a. Jim Bankruptcy, and Todd Young. All they have done is forced more and more debt on our children, while they spend like left-wing lunatics. Folks, we have to elect real conservatives to Congress, not these massive fraud career politicians who wrap themselves in the flag while fully funding massive new government debt at Joe Biden levels. And that's what they're doing today. Pete Hegseth is right. We have to get back to merit in this country. To be in public service should never be a career.
Exactly. That's why I say all the incumbents, vote them out.
Absolutely. Pete Hegseth is exactly right. We have to get back to merit in this country. Again, to be in public service should not be a career where you have to be forced on Hoosiers like Virginia's Jim Banks. It should be based on accomplishment in life. And the only thing these career politicians have accomplished is massive new debt. They are total and utter massive frauds. Jim Banks and Todd Young have been at the switch now for 8 years. They chose a path to bankruptcy by refusing to cut government spending and increasing our debt massively. Now over $6 trillion of new debt just this year. Folks, we're out of time, but I want to close with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Folks, I will see you all again next week on the radio.